right, peace and blessings, family, and happy Wednesday. This is the day before Thanksgiving. A lot of people are probably cooking, aromas are filling their homes, children are running around, you're talking to your grandmama, getting history, hearing a lot of stories of the past. Even though we know that there is a different definition and origins of Thanksgiving, and I do honor the Native people with that, but I also know, particularly being an African American, that we get a lot of things, but we tend to adopt it and make it something absolutely beautiful for us to bring our family together. So today, in that spirit, it is my esteemed pleasure and honor to interview a gentleman who's literally impacted my life, taught me some things I never knew about myself and the world, and it is my most humble honor to be interviewing today my good friend, Yehiel Yisrael. Welcome to Earth Mama Live.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
I love you have a lot of history and knowledge, and I'm just grateful that you came to share that on today. I think it is so important. We're in this Thanksgiving season, and for a lot of people, there's a different meaning to it, and I totally understand that. But then I understand sometimes people take it and they use it as a time to pull family together, pull elders together with young people, where we get to learn about history and culture and things like that. Where are you originally from? Where were you born?
So I was born in Sonoma County, in Santa Rosa, California, and raised on a ranch west of Sebastopol. We had apples, we had horses, cows, sheep, row crops, all kinds of trees. We had berries, cherries, about 200 acres. And 14 miles from the ocean at Bodega Bay, and 56 miles north of San Francisco.
Okay. So let me say this, y'all. If you're watching this, this is great. I'm also going to share on a few other things. You could definitely post your questions and comments. But I also think this is the time of year. If you have elders, even if they're not in your bloodline, you should be asking them these questions and learning more about history and time and space. And no matter which view is coming from, I firmly believe you can always learn something about yourself inside that equation. So with that being said, your parents, who were they? Because I know they're both ancestors now. What's their backgrounds? Right. And how did they get to California?
So my mother, Miriam, was...
her name was Miriam?
Miriam.
Wow.
Blessed memory. She was a social worker, philanthropist, played music. My parents had a radio show actually in Santa Rosa. My dad sang. He was a soloist. And
your father sang?
My father, once the first sound of his voice could make you cry.
Wow.
It was powerful. I have the same exact feeling in a black church, or when I hear gospel music sung by African Americans. Usually the first sound makes me cry. Powerful. Powerful spirit.
Okay, so with that being said, your father was what?
Okay, so my father was born in Italy.
Okay.
He was brought to Ellis Island in the arms of my grandmother from Deliceto, Apulia, on the back of the boot of Italy, not far from Bari, the port of Bari. And so he was raised in Brooklyn. He became a veterinarian, the oldest of 3 children. And my uncle died in the war. We don't know why, but he was a veterinary.
Which war was that?
World War II.
World War II.
He was a veterinary medical officer. So my parents met through music, and like I said, they had a radio show. My mother's family had been in the United States for many years, one branch back to the Revolution, and there's Sephardim on my mother's side, and Ashkenazi. Sephardi Jews from Spain and Portugal.
Okay.
Who were kicked out in 1492. Columbus's ships were sponsored by the king and queen with money, with a tiny bit of the money that was confiscated from the Jews.
Okay.
That's why there were a lot of Jewish pirates in the Caribbean, because they hated Spain, and they robbed the Spanish, and sometimes they worked for the English, sometimes they were privateers.
Okay. So that's your mother's side.
Right.
How did your mom's family come to the United States?
So they came from Western Europe, different countries. You go back that far, time colonial times from Holland, especially. Most of the Sephardim escaped into Europe to Holland. Many of them went to the Muslim world, of course. They were invited to join the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire. And many of them went to Israel, of course. I want to say, so the major influences on my life were the right kind of love that I got from my parents, grandparents. Was raised in the same home with my grandparents on the mom's side and my parents. And my dad's parents moved 2 miles away from Brooklyn. So I was really blessed to be in the presence of elders who knew a lot, and diverse culture. We also had a big Japanese American community. There is in Sebastopol, very famous. The first Buddhist temple was in Sebastopol, purchased from the World's Exposition in 1939 and brought to Sebastopol then. And so my family were very close to the Japanese Americans and guarded their things, their property, because they were neighbors. 2 of our neighbors were Japanese Americans, 2 were Italian Americans on the ranch. And my grandfather was a good friend of the sheriff. The sheriff was also pro-Japanese American, pro-civil rights.
So this was during World War II?
This was at the start of World War II.
Okay, that would be
Japanese
very
Americans
important.
taken into the camp. Right. My grandfather also on a streetcar in Atlanta, Georgia in 1926, when the Klan was, of course, totally in control there. He got up on the front seat of the streetcar to give his seat to a black woman. And he was told, you better sit down or he'd be arrested also with her. So that I'm very proud of my family.
Right on, right on. So with that being said, when you were young growing up in Sebastopol, what was your school system like? Like one time you shared with me the letters, and I thought this was quite interesting.
So I was blessed very early by having educated family. My grandmother, on my mom's side, had a BA degree in California, where she was born in Petaluma. She had a degree, bachelor's degree in 1891, and that was very rare for even a man. Of course, and her husband only had 8th grade, right? And he became big in business. He started out with nothing, and bought and sold. Well, he was a rancher, but mostly he made money buying and selling real estate. And he just started out the richest man in the town, in the county gave him a loan because he liked him, and he started out buying 5 acres. And then this was all virgin timber, and we lived in Pomo and Miwok, Native American ground, Wintun in Santa Rosa, but more Pomo there. So, but my salvation was that I got the right amount of love, the right type of love.
From your parents.
From my parents and grandparents, and great neighbors. In the time when you didn't lock the door of your house or your car, you left the key in the ignition and just walked away, and nobody touched anything. Everybody had guns, but nobody got shot.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, we went hunting and fishing. But I got a love of learning and a love of history, especially, and I saw myself in history, like from the past to me to the future, and that was key, and that's of course biblical themes in the Torah, the begats. I was always I learned Torah, I learned Jewish prayer and the Psalms, especially from my grandmother. She taught me how to memorize the first Psalm, and I went on from there to learn a lot. We had encyclopedias. We had the National Geographic magazine going back to 1911 when my mother was born. And she had a huge library. Both my grandmother and my mother had huge libraries. So that's, you get the love of learning and learn how to learn. Life is continuing education. Hopefully we put it to use for a purpose.
So with that being said, when you were growing up, you explained to me a system. I'm only bringing this up because I think we deal with this in a different way today. You talked about the system of the letters. I think it was Y, Z, and you know how in school people were like the smartest kids was in a particular letter.
Oh,
the
okay.
kids who were mediocre.
Right. So
how did that work?
I don't know when this started, but this was, I was finished 8th grade in 1960, and started high school in 61. And everyone, I guess in California, I don't know outside of California, but generally in the United States and in other countries, they have a tracking system which segregated you by your intelligence test. So we didn't know what this was about, but in the 8th grade, near the end of the school year, we took a series of tests that lasted about a week. And that determined, the outcome of those tests determined our whole high school. It would either be an X, a Y, or a Z. It's called the tracking system.
X, Y, or Z.
Right, and the better, the more intelligent, supposedly, you could only take certain classes like drama, yearbook, journalism, and so on, and you got the better teachers if you were an X.
Wow.
Okay, if you were a Z, you took shop classes. And the Y, like me, were in the middle.
Wow.
So they felt that this was against the one-room school system that we'd had previously, where everybody's in together, the smarter ones help the dumber ones, so-called, and you might find out that the so-called dumber ones are actually the geniuses. Like Einstein didn't do well in school, and because it was too simple for him. He was bored, and if a student is bored, they might seem dumb, but because the teacher has to give you the love of what you're learning.
Right on.
Whether it's a coach in sports or whatever it is, and of course, that's teaching is a holy job. I think any job is holy if it's good. It produces a good outcome and doesn't hurt anyone. It's a service or a product. It's holy. And in psychotherapy, I'm a psychotherapist, of course, and I was a psychotherapist in San Francisco for 20 years.
We're gonna get to that.
Worked in the jail, juvenile hall, and so on. And having a purpose in life is very important. And knowing that you're important, knowing that you have a purpose, and that you're a child of God, and God is perfect, so we should try to be perfect. That's in the Torah. That's what God asks us to be perfect.
I'm trying to walk our way through your life because you have so many extraordinary things. Then there was a time in your life that you was a part of the Coast Guard?
No, I was a part of the Army.
The Army,
Right.
sorry. I think about
So I was in two armies. I'm Israeli and American dual citizen.
Right.
And I was, first I was in the U.S. Army.
What made you join the Army?
This was during the Vietnam War. I had a full college deferment, but my brother and I thought that we should contribute to the war effort, to the defense of the country at the time, the Cold War. Everything was defined in the United States by the Cold War for me, as far as politics. And of course I had a great epiphany after the Cold War. So I went in terms of conservative economic philosophy, which I was a conservative because I was pro-American. I didn't think that much about the economy. When I grew up, most things that were manufactured in the United States because World War II had decimated manufacturing elsewhere. And so I was basically, I became a union leader. I realized a lot of things that I didn't know. So I've been a supporter of 4 different political parties, 2 conservative and 2 liberal. And I don't like either side 100%. I like some things on the left, some things on the right. I don't like the way they're divided, and I think most Americans are also. Maybe 40% don't vote for whatever reason, young voters, new voters, whatever. But it's important to vote. As you said, people died for your right to vote. Right? I'm a student of the Civil War and the Reconstruction. I love history. But that particular period of the Reconstruction, 40 Acres and a Mule, which was stopped. It only lasted 7 to 12 years, depending on the state, because of corruption and racism in the Congress, because of President Johnson, Andrew Johnson, who was a Southerner and sympathized with the Southerners and let the plantation owners get back their plantations that were supposed to be given to to the freedmen and women.
Right on, right on. So after your stint in the U.S. Army, what were some of the things that happened when you were in the U.S. Army?
Right. So I did basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, 1968. I was in the National Guard. I came home and I was a recon officer in the National Guard of California, and subsequently, before I went to Israel and immigrated there, I changed over to the Army Reserve in the Presidio. That was the oldest military base in San Francisco in the United States.
Yeah.
And I was in a psychological operations outfit. So we made propaganda to win the hearts and minds of the people we were trying to help to free them from communism. That's the Vietnamese, but also for other Sun Tzu. Other than the Torah and the Tanakh, which is the greatest books ever written, the truth is the Torah is the truth, and that's been the center of my life. With purpose, and you have to live it out. It's not just a study. You have to obviously apply it to how you treat others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't care so much what people say they believe in their theology, although that's very important, but I care more how you treat people, how you treat yourself and how you treat other people. That's key, right? And that's universal. So whatever, and in fact, Jews don't want people to all become Jewish. The Christians do. They want everybody to become Christians. The Muslims want everybody to become Muslim. Jews want people just to be good, and in terms of the covenant of B'nai Noach, the Noachite covenant, which is in the book of Genesis. 7 laws, the Jews have 613 laws in the Torah, but non-Jews have 7 laws. They're similar to the 10 Commandments, and they're basically to love God, not to do idolatry, to treat animals well, not to make animals suffer, to have courts of law to enforce these laws. Also, no murder, no stealing,
Mm-hmm.
no sexual crimes, according to the same as Jews have in the Torah. And basically to treat people right, social justice.
So what made you go from the U.S. military to you were a part of the Jewish military in Israel? How did you do that? Like why?
Well, I got on a plane and flew to Israel and made Aliyah under the law of return.
Okay.
And that's immigration. Aliyah means going up.
Okay.
So the Israeli airline El Al, and actually also Allah and Elohim in Arabic and Hebrew, and the Jordanian airline is Aliyah also. It means going up. So you're going up to Jerusalem, even if you come from Mount Everest.
Right.
Yeah, you're still going up to Jerusalem.
So you basically went to Israel. So were you a practicing Jew at the time?
Yes.
Or
okay. I started keeping Torah when I was 21. When I met the first Orthodox Jews that I met in my life in Fort Leonard Wood. And most of us were going to Vietnam, some were going to Germany, Korea, and a few in the Guard and Reserve going back home for a 6-year obligation. And so I made Aliyah in July of '73. Then the Yom Kippur War happened on October 6th of that year.
What's Yom Kippur War?
Yom Kippur War was when the Egyptians and the Syrians attacked, supposedly by surprise, attacked Israel on Yom Kippur, when everyone was in synagogue and so on.
So Yom Kippur is the holiday.
Yom Kippur is a holiday,
Bam,
and
gotcha.
they like, our enemies like to attack us on our holidays or on Shabbat. However, this was not really a surprise. Golda Meir, instead of fearing God, the prime minister, she feared Henry Kissinger, who said Israel has to accept the first strike without doing anything and allow itself to be attacked because America needs friends in the Muslim world, and the Muslim world sees America as pro-Israel and anti-Muslim because of America's support of Israel in the 6-Day War.
Okay.
Right. Actually, Israel pretty much did alone, but it was perceived that that America was only one-sided in general supporting Israel. So Israel has to support itself, and when that happens, good things will happen. Israel is suffering from secular and anti-Torah left-wing leadership, which we call actually post-Zionist. Israel actually is no longer Zionist because 35 years ago or so, the Supreme Court became hard left of Israel, and it made various decisions saying that Israel is not a Jewish state legally. It is a multinational, multi-religious country. A lot of people don't know this.
Right on. That's why I'm listening.
Right.
Yeah,
So this is called, it caused, it's not caused peace, it has caused the opposite, because if you follow God, you'll have peace. If you don't, you're going to have problems.
Now hold on, because I don't want you to jump ahead of me. So when you got to Israel in 1973, you said?
Yes.
What was that like? Were you you want to make Aliyah? What makes you want to go make Aliyah? What was in your mind? What made you want to go all the way and go back to the motherland? What made you do that?
So even as a kid, I had thought about it. I was proud to be Jewish and proud to live in the time I was living. And when I met Orthodox Jews in the army in 1968, subsequently I became active in the Jewish community, both locally in Santa Rosa, where there's a synagogue, Petaluma's synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
Petaluma was the northernmost extent of the Spanish and Mexican colonization of North America on the Pacific, and also in Sonoma County. And in Sonoma County, farther north in the same county, is the farthest south extent of the Russian colonization in North America, Fort Ross. So you had Petaluma, the Spanish and the Mexican after the Revolution, and then Fort Ross was actually just maybe 20 years operating as a fur seal and fur otter base for hunting for fur for the Russians. And yeah, so Sonoma County is pivotal in American history and California history. And there was also this place of the first kibbutz in the United States in the 1920s.
What's a kibbutz?
A kibbutz is a communal farm.
Okay.
Right. Or communal business. It could be, mostly it's farm agriculture. And from 1922 to 1924, there was a small group of labor Zionist Jews that are slightly left-wing or very left-wing, in some cases. There were communists in Petaluma. Actually, 2 Jews were tarred and feathered in the late 1930s in Sonoma County.
Oh, wow.
Because they were communists. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And the culprits that did it were the veterans, I believe, connected with American Legion, and other people. There was actually a lynching in 1920 or 21 in Sonoma County of 3 white young men who had shot the sheriff and killed him. Right? I don't know if this is the same sheriff that Bob Marley was saying about.
Shot the sheriff.
Yeah. So he was from Healdsburg. So all the men the next night came in their Model T Fords or whatever they were driving from Healdsburg to Santa Rosa, got the 3 young men out of the jail. They were all armed, of course, and they hung them in the cemetery on a tree.
Wow.
Because they shot the sheriff, and the sheriff was their friend from their town. And they all drove back. No one ever said anything. No one ever.
Dinner and went to bed.
They all kept quiet till the last one, who was a little boy who died, and they asked him what happened. He saw the whole thing. He didn't say anything. He went to his grave.
Wow. That's deep. So when you got to Israel, 1974, right? 1973.
Mm-hmm.
When you got there, and you made Aliyah, which means to go up and to return to Jerusalem, correct? What were you expecting, or what was that like in 1973?
I loved it. First of all, I went to a kibbutz, a religious kibbutz, Orthodox.
And
in
kibbutz
Surim.
is a Jewish form.
Kibbutz is a Jewish communal form.
Communal form, got
Right.
it. Okay.
And so, the political founders of Israel were secular, non-religious, left-wing, but many of the previously, Zionism was started by Moses. It's very ancient, okay, but the first secular Zionists were started by Theodor Herzl and his friends, his organization in Europe. But there were Jews coming and going all the time, especially from Yemen, from North Africa, from the Middle East, many more than from Europe.
Okay, you just said a word that's a key word to look at. You use the term Zionist. What is a Zionist?
Okay, so Zion is another name for Jerusalem.
Okay.
Right? It's one of the, Ariel is another name for Jerusalem. There are many names for Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, which King David took from the Jebusites or the Yebusim in around 1000 BCE.
What's it, Yebusim?
Yebusim, they're one of the 10 tribes of the Canaanites.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So
go back to Zionism.
right.
I'm sorry.
So, but when people think of Zionism, they're thinking mostly of Herzl and the secular movement that got the money and organization. Previously, there were other people who were always coming to Israel. Their communities were sending them money to survive because during the time of the Turks there was no work, there was no industry, there were very few people of any kind in Israel. Mark Twain was there. He said it's desolate, pretty much. And much of Judea and Samaria, most of it is also empty. There's small villages, a few cities, and Arabs and Jews live there. And unfortunately, there's jihad against us. So it's if you're Jewish and you live in Judea and Samaria, it's dangerous for you. If you're a tourist, it's not dangerous, really.
Okay.
Because everybody wants the tourist to shop.
Okay, I get this. Hold on just a minute. So you said something that we're going to need some clarity on. Sometimes I hear you say Jewish and Arab, and then you'll say Jews are being Jewish and Muslim. So I get that Arab is a group of people. Being a Muslim is your religious belief. But Jews, you just say you use Jews for a people and a religious faith. How
Yes.
does that work?
Yes.
Oh, I'm trying to get it right in my head. That's
Okay,
why I was
so in
doing
Israel, you have to have a internal passport, Tudat Zahut, and you're supposed to keep it on you for ID purposes. So in the Tudat Zahut, it gives La'um, which means your ethnicity or peoplehood, your
that.
nation.
Okay.
And that's, for Jews, that's Jewish. It also says Dat, which is a Persian loan word for religion. It comes from the book of Daniel. There's no ancient Hebrew word for religion because it's about a relationship with God. It's not about a religion. The Torah is about a relationship, being stuck. The Hasidim talk about being glued to God. That my spirit is part of
You
God.
said Hallenium? You said Hallenium?
The Hasidim.
Hasidim. What is that?
Hasidim. So the Hasidim are people who have a lot of joy and are close to God. And they're from ancient times till today. But the Hasidic movement that most people talk about started in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in the 1700s.
Okay.
Right. So Many of the Hasidim wear old-style European clothing with the big hats, fur hats, and long black coats and so on. That the black is for mourning, but Jews in ancient times, of course, wore more light-colored clothing, similar to Africa and different places also. Yeah.
So when you got to Israel, 73, there was a war starting to happen, you said, right?
3 months after I got there.
3 months.
Yeah.
Right. So did you immediately just join the military there, or?
No. So I was in the kibbutz. No, the day it started, I was in Jerusalem in the synagogue, and sergeants came in and tapped officers on the shoulder and they go. We didn't know what it was. I found out later that there was a war, and so I went to the Western Wall, and then I heard that police wanted to lock people for protection in the tunnels where I usually prayed. So I just went home. And the Yom Kippur War was very quick. Just a few weeks it was over, because Israel recovered very quickly and decimated the enemy. We've never lost a war since we've been a nation, or trying to be a nation in 1948 and beyond. But we always lose the peace because our leaders give up, and we need leaders who will say to the nations, we're going to do what we need to do. This is our land, and it's none of your business to tell us what to do. They don't tell Ireland, they don't tell China, they don't tell Argentina what to do. They only tell Israel what to do because Israel allows it.
Okay, is this partly biblical? So help me out with this. Judaism, which I think Torah, Christianity, Bible, Islam, Quran. What is the linkage between the three of those monotheistic religions?
So,
what is
so Israel has a covenant with God according to the Torah, and we have 24 books in the Tanakh. It's divided into 36 books in the Christian Old Testament, but it's the same text.
Okay.
With a few exceptions in translation for theological purposes by Christians, which is a no-no. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
So the problem that Jews have with these other religions is that they're guilty of what's called replacement theology. So the Christians first, and then the Muslims claim that they replaced. First of all, they claim that God is with Israel originally, but that Israel sinned and gave the mantle of the spiritual economy of God to first the Christians and then the Muslims. So they claim that they replace Israel with Christianity, and then the Muslims claim that they replace both the Christians and the Jews. So this is called supersessionism. Supersessionism was invented by the Romans, and then accepted and done by Muhammad as well. And the other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, so on, they don't do that because they don't have a relationship with the Bible. They don't care about the Bible, so they don't claim that they replace the Jews. It's only the Christians and different types of Christianity, as well as Muslims, that claim that they replace Israel.
Well, why does it look like, Yehiel? And I'm gonna make sure I stay on course, but this always bothers me because when I see Middle Eastern Jews and I see Middle Eastern Muslims, y'all look the same to me. Your food, I mean, thanks to you, I've eaten Israeli food, I've had Middle Eastern food. I don't really see a huge difference aside from, like if I say something is kosher, if I say something is halal, what's the big difference between the two? They look like brothers, like what is this?
Well, so prophetically in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Holy Scriptures, Hebrew Scriptures, we find that we'll have peace and brotherhood with all the Semites. The only Semites
What's a Semite?
The Semites are Arabs and Jews.
Okay.
today. There are other Semites. These are descendants from Shem ben Noach. Okay, Noach. We have the Noahide covenant for the non-Jews, or the Gentiles, the nations. And Noach had 3 sons: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem is the father of the Semites. Ham is the father of the Africans, and also other people who came out of Africa, who were, say, in India, in Melanesia, and other places in Australia, which I'll be meeting my friend Boraguba from who lives in Arnhem Land, and hangs out sometimes in the Queen Street Mall. A star didgeridoo player and activist. He's leading the movement of Australian Aborigines not to sell their land rights for mining, because the mining hurts the land, pollutes the water in the land.
Okay.
Same thing in
So
especially in the Southwest. Native Americans have the same problem with uranium polluting the land. Very dangerous in the water. Yeah.
I get that, but tell me about the difference between the Muslim and the Jew, or you know what? Because I can't. Sometimes they look like the same people. Their food look the same. I mean, some of the things y'all do look like it's the same people to me as an outsider.
So there's obviously Jews and Arabs are related.
Oh, okay.
They're cousins, right? So, but now Muslims, that you could be from any national group. I should say the Torah, the Jewish scriptures, does not recognize the concept of race. It recognizes that there's one God who created all people.
You talking about Jewish people?
I'm talking about all the people of the world God created.
Okay, I'll take that. Okay.
And the Bible doesn't talk about race. It talks about families of humankind, right? The concept of race that we have developed now it's about 200 or 300 years old. Thomas Jefferson actually has a lot to do with from a scientific viewpoint. He was a scientist, and
it's a little bit more than 200 years old, because slavery existed more than 400 years, so it has to be a lot older than that.
But I'm talking about race in terms of racism and racial superiority and so on. We don't find that view previous, as far as I've heard. Okay.
I only say that because I recognize that 400 years.
Slavery is everywhere in the world, and Africans were enslaved, Europeans were enslaved. The word slave, actually, in English, comes from Slav, because the Romans enslaved the Slavs, and that's how the term slave was invented.
So what year was that was invented? Do you know?
Well, that's 2,000 years ago.
Okay, so I would,
But again, it wasn't a racial thing. As an insidious racial thing that's become the racism that we've known, comes from the Atlantic triangular slave trade, to my knowledge.
No, I got you. That's what I'm saying. That's more than 200 years old. That's all I'm saying. Because we know we're talking about, some people say 1555, some people say 1619. So we know that concept of some people being superior, some people being inferior. You know,
right, but I don't think that there was the theory of
German geneticists
of one group being better. I think that there was just power. So some men had power and money and guns or swords, whatever they had, and they enslaved people. But I don't think that they didn't write that this whole group was inferior, as far as I know. I could be wrong, but it certainly became I only know a little bit.
I know, okay? I got you. I'm just going off the dates, but I get what you're saying.
You have to be humble and say, man, the encyclopedia knows more than you, and then God knows way more than the encyclopedia.
Right on.
So I learn stuff every day. I try to learn and listen to my psychotherapy clients. I learn a lot from them, a lot of good stuff. I have a lot of, and from everybody.
So let me ask you
people
this.
I meet in the street.
I get that. You're always constantly seeking knowledge. That's why I have so much respect for you. But
continuing education is important.
When you were in Israel and you talked to me about your interaction with, say, Ethiopian Jews, when did you first discover that there were Jews who were of African origin, who were black? when you went to Israel?
Okay, so I knew that Jews were all over the world. There were different so-called races from the time I was a kid. I mean, that's just history. It's known Jews are all over the world, like Christians and Muslims are all over the world, and have different national groups and races. So, but I knew that before I went to Israel, I studied Ethiopian Jews and Yemenite Jews. They were particularly interesting to me, those two groups. And they're right across the Red Sea from each other. And a major difference, of course, is the Yemenite Jews, actually the most knowledgeable scholars in Israel. When they were in Yemen, they learned how to read the Torah from any angle, from like backwards, upside down, the right and the left, and as well as the front view of the book of the Sefer. And so even the women in Yemen knew a lot of Torah because education was very important. It's to all Jews in general. So, and that keeps us together, even though we weren't in our land. What kept us together were our rabbis, and one of the things the rabbis did was to make more laws we call fences around the Torah, so we wouldn't get close to disobeying the Torah, because we couldn't even get close to it. We had fences around it. You can't even do that. Right. But also they kept us together by keeping us separate. The non-Jews kept us separate in some cases. The thing of the yellow star or badge, that's an Islamic invention. The Christians had certain kind of pointed hats for the Jews had to wear. But what we wanted to do was stay together and not intermarry, because if you're living around people, you're going to fall in love. That's just how it works.
Tell me about these Ethiopian Jews. How did you
So I helped to rescue Ethiopian Jews in 1983 in Sudan. I was there for 3 months until the Israeli government said, we're going to take over the project. We were trying to push them, and Menachem Begin ordered the Ethiopian Jews be respected and brought back, as they had been asking for since the 1930s. They had been asking the Zionists to bring them. The left wing didn't want them. Begin was on the right. He wanted them. He knew, first of all, he knew Jewish history, and he knew that they were Jewish. Their Jewishness was never in doubt. What was in doubt was the fact that they, unlike the Yemenite Jews, as an example, they didn't have the oral law written down. They didn't have the Talmud. And so the Talmud gives the regulations on marriage and everything else, gives the details of what's written in the Torah. Okay, if you read most verses in the Torah, the law, you'll be perplexed. How was this carried out? You have to have more instructions how to carry it out. And so you have the written law is the statute law. Any lawyer understands this. And the oral law is the case law. This is brilliant. This is the way that the Torah stays young and vibrant and hooked up to whatever could happen in any time and place. Okay, and situation. Those three things: time, place, and situation. Through the oral law, and the oral law is being added to all the time. Anytime a rabbi has a question and it's not explicitly understood in the written Torah, then we go to the oral Torah. And even the oral Torah explains things that may appear to be clear in the written Torah, which is elucidated more. And this has to do with thousands of years of living in places around the world, in which the oral Torah kept us together and explained how we live.
So how did you get those Ethiopian Jews from the Sudan? First of all, how did they get to Sudan? And two, what was it like getting them to Israel? Okay,
so about 10 or 15 years, maybe 20 years before, we had the same problem with Russian Jews, trying to get the Russian Jews out of Russia because they were being persecuted. And so in 1975, there were two revolutions 6 months apart, the same as in 1917 in Russia. the socialists took over. They put the emperor, in this case Haile Selassie, and in 1917, the Russian emperor, put them in house arrest, didn't hurt them. 6 months later, in both cases, in 1917 and 1975, the communists took over, and the first thing they did was to kill the emperor and all his family.
Wow.
So that's what happened. So the Derg, which is the Communist Party in Ethiopia, proceeded to go on and have a civil war and murder upwards of 1.5 to 2 million Ethiopians, not fighting a war with another country, just within that country.
So the Civil War?
It was a civil war. In other words, the communists were trying to force everyone to be communists, as they did in Russia 70 years before that. So the Jews were caught in the middle, as they always are, in the middle between one insanity and another insanity, just trying to exist, between the Christians and the Muslims, or between the communists and the fascists. So what happened was, I was recruited I had 3 days to get to London when I first heard that I was needed to replace someone. I was drafted into this, and I served 3 months there. At the same time, we wanted the Israeli government to do this. They had a better means. We had never done this. We had no experience doing this. And then we had the Jews were being killed in Ethiopia by the communists, or by the Christians that saw an opportunity to get the Jews. They didn't claim the Jews were communists, because the Jews in Ethiopia were very poor, and the last Jewish empire was the Ethiopian Jewish Empire, but it was destroyed in around 1600, 1660 by a series of queens named Candace were involved in this, and they got the help of the Portuguese artillery. Right, the Portuguese were the first Europeans to circumnavigate Africa in modern times, since the Romans may have done it. But certainly the Portuguese, they went on to have colonies in Goa and India and in China. They had colonies and so on, and Japan. Yeah.
So while you were in Israel, you were able to meet your ex-wife. You met her in Israel, and then you all got married.
Right.
And had 2 beautiful children.
Yep.
What were their names?
Okay, so Rachel, my daughter, the psychologist in Australia now, she was born in 78 in Jerusalem.
What was her full name?
Her full name is Rachel Carmiela Murdo Yisrael. Yeah.
What
She
does
changed her
mean?
name back to my former English, or you might say slave name, in order to fit in Australia, and my son did also, especially my son, because he wanted to fit in. The teenage boys are definitely, and girls, they want to fit in, and
So
Australia is very English.
So Bordeaux, is that the proper pronunciation of that name, or is it
Bordeaux?
Bordeaux.
Yeah.
Bordeaux.
That's my father's Italian name.
Gotcha. And then your son's name was?
So my son is Yaharam Benjamin Yisrael.
Benjamin. What does Benjamin mean?
Benjamin. So Benjamin is Benjamin. Benjamin was the name of my ex-wife's father, who died when he was 41. He had 3 jobs around the clock. Right. His third job at night was to guard a place.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was guarding a gravel pit.
Okay, so what does your son's first name mean?
Yaharam means Yah, the Lord, is high. Ram. Yah, Yahoram. Yaho is 3 parts of Yahweh, or we say Hashem. Okay, we don't pronounce the name of God normally. out of respect.
Gotcha.
We say Hashem, we say Adonai, different titles.
Got that.
But
Okay.
I actually said it in order to be clear what I'm talking about.
Understand. Thank you for that clarity. So then you were all married. How long did you live in Israel the first time?
First time 7 years, throughout the 70s. And of course I've seen many changes in Israel, some good, some not good. Yeah.
Okay. So with that being said, when you came back to the States, what was different for you coming back? You came back in what, 80?
I came back the last day of 79.
79,
Yeah.
okay.
I was, my great rabbi Shlomo Carlebach was on the same plane, and so he was the first singing rabbi.
Okay.
He and another man, Zalman Schechter Shalomi, were two Chabad rabbis in 1950, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, or just the Rebbe, sent those two men to do kiruv, or to minister to the spiritual needs of Jews in college campuses in the East Coast.
Gotcha.
In 1950.
Okay.
They later, in the 60s, came to the Bay Area. Shlomo came to San Francisco, Zalman came to Berkeley, and they founded synagogues there and communities. And many of those people made Aliyah. The two people I know that were my rabbis were Rabbi Meir David Kahane, Hashem Yikum Damo, and may the Lord avenge his blood. He was assassinated by an Al-Qaeda operative, jihadi, in New York City, and then his son and his son's wife were assassinated in Israel by jihadis 10 years later. But so the two men that have influenced more Jews to make Aliyah from North America are Shlomo Carlebach and his good friend Rabbi Kahane.
Okay.
They were both from New York.
So what made you start wanting to become a psychotherapist?
Okay, so after 7 years in Israel, then I was 30 years back in the United States, and among the things I did, of course, I went to Sudan to rescue Ethiopian Jews, and I later went back to school, to graduate school. I tried to be a tour guide in Israel early on in the 70s, but because I was religious, the secular people in charge wouldn't let me be a guide, and there were no religious tour guides allowed in Israel until they forced it in the 1980s, when it became more of a business model. And then they wanted everybody to attend the school because they made money from the students. Yeah. I finally later went to the tour guide course. I loved it, and I completed it from 2012 to 2014. But getting back to the time I was in the States, so I was looking for a graduate psych school, and I started in one school, and it wasn't accredited, and it never actually got accredited for 10 years. Then I didn't finish in that school because it was hard to learn. It was just a terrible school, and I got into New College of California, and I loved it. And I have my master's in clinical psychology. Actually, it's called social clinical psychology, and because it has a little more social emphasis. So, and then I was a therapist in 4 nonprofit agencies in San Francisco, after working in 3 psychiatric hospitals in the early 90s. Right, Gladman in Oakland, East Bay in Richmond, and CPC Walnut Creek Hospital in Walnut Creek, which no longer exists because they didn't want to sign a contract. I helped to start a union, brand new union chapter in 2 places as a psychotherapist, in a psych hospital and then in West Side West Side in San Francisco. Yeah, it's about 150 employees, and I was elected president of the union of that chapter. This was SEIU. Turned out that SEIU was a weak union. Well, unions are generally weakened now because we have 40 years of Reaganomics, which is ended the middle class basically and shifted the jobs through outsourcing around the world, especially Mexico, China, Japan, everywhere, even Canada. It's cheaper labor. So it's important to bring the jobs back. Trump is the only one who's talked about that issue, but yeah.
Okay, so with that, where did you work as a psychotherapist?
So I worked in Swords to Plowshares Veterans Rights Organization for a short time. Then I went on to Westside Community Mental Health for 7 years, and then Morrisania West. Both of those are African American based nonprofit agencies. When Morrisania West, I worked for 7 years. It no longer exists, but we did great work when it existed. And then I worked for an Asian based 501c3 organization, RAMS, which is Richmond Area Multi-Services Center in Langton, Mission. And I did psychotherapy. I also did substance abuse counseling. And also, on my own, I started a project in the San Francisco main jails, number 1 and 2. I had 60 clients. That's all I could take, because I had other clients in my office, mostly referred for selling and using drugs by the court or by parents or schools or so on. Almost never self-referred because they didn't want to be in counseling. They wanted to do drugs or whatever they're doing. But they didn't think in most cases they could use the help. But this was drug programs. So I had 4 murders on my caseload. The saddest, most tragic aspect was the women prisoners in the San Francisco jail, many of whom had been raped from the time that they were infants and had quite often had every disease, uncurable disease. Horrible. They needed a lady counselor. They didn't need me, but there was nobody. All other than me, in the main jail, they just got medication. That's it. And they didn't need, in most cases, another drug. They were already addicted. They needed to listen and to talk. They needed someone who would listen to them and talk to them. And
what was it like for you spending so much time around African Americans, whether it was at your job or in your personal life? What was that about? What was that attraction about?
Okay, so my family had 2 families that were African American friends of ours in Sebastopol, and they were the only 2 black families in the town. The town was about 3,500 people at that time. Most of the people lived on the ranches outside of town, actually, and there were another couple of black families outside of town. But the Hamiltons and the Tigners were good friends of ours, and they were both Seventh-day Adventists, and they came to Sebastopol in probably the early 60s from the South, and they turned out to be David Tigner's opera singer. Linda Tigner became a physician in LA, and both the families were outstanding. If you did any of the tests on them, they would definitely be in the X group. Definitely.
Right on. What kind of music you like?
So I love all kinds of music, from different nations. I like world beat. My favorite music is probably soul music and black gospel, jazz. I've been a blues man for many years. When I lived in Sebastopol, I used to come down to Eli's Mile High Club on Martin Luther King. Yeah, and that doesn't exist as a blues club anymore, sadly. In fact, most of the blues clubs don't exist because the OGs like myself passed away, and or just not going out to clubs, whatever the reason.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's your music. Any favorite singers?
Patti LaBelle.
My mama loves a Patti LaBelle too.
Of course.
What is it about Patti LaBelle that you love, that you like, that she's like one of
And
your
Paul
favorites?
Robeson. I think for a male singer, Paul Robeson, and for in general, man or woman, Patti LaBelle is the top to me. So, and it's the same reason, the same thing that attracts me to African people is the spirituality of the people, the culture of the people, and the beauty, physical beauty, psychological.
What do you mean when you say the spirituality of the people? What does that mean?
You're probably going to think I'm talking about Orishas.
Okay. Well, yeah, what do you
Well,
mean by
just
that? I hear that a lot.
I think basically people are people, but there's some cultures that, let's say, if I was exposed to other cultures, like maybe more Asian cultures, and some of the other cultures I might be, and Native American cultures. Of course, I've been to powwows all the time for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Been going to powwows. That's one thing I missed in Israel. There were no Native American powwows. I met some Native American tourists and toured them around. Some chiefs. In fact, they gave us a blessing years ago that we'd find oil, and we did. Israel found oil and natural gas, a huge amount, mostly offshore. So, yeah. And in fact, but that's also prophesied in the scriptures.
Tell us what it is about black folks. You said this the spirit of the people. What is that?
So, well, I just I don't want to overstate the case. I just found the beauty of African Americans in body, soul, and spirit in every way.
Gotcha.
Culture. And I look at African Americans and Native Americans who are and have been the most downtrodden groups in the United States. I look at them as being the actual royalty, right, of America. They've earned that right. And they, because when you go through hell and you stand up straight and proud still, that says something. That shows character. As Martin Luther King spoke about, the content of character. So I found the history to be just blew my mind. But I started learning this young when I was, had books in the library, and then I met people, and then I was listening to the news and understanding. And I grew up, of course, in the civil rights era, and I wasn't in the South, but I was in
Up south.
in Sebastopol.
Southwest.
One of my great teachers, Mr. Gordon, Harold Gordon, visited. He and his family took a hiatus from work, a sabbatical year, and toured around the United States and spent a lot of their time in the South working in the civil rights movement. And he brought this back the following year in our U.S. history class and talked about this, among other things. And I got the love for understanding the history of the world, the history of America. No place, no individual person, tribe, county, state, country, group, whatever, however you define it, is perfect. But we have to try to be as good as we can be. And so that's the hope of America. That's why people are coming here still from all over the world. We have to admit our sins as individuals. Okay, Jews say we have no works. Christianity lies about Judaism and said the Jews believe they're saved by works. No, that's not true. We say in Yom Kippur, we ein lanu ma'asim, we have no works. Literally that, right? So, and we don't think we are chosen to be better. We're chosen to have a heavy burden, heavier than everybody else. A lot of times we say, maybe God should choose someone else, the burden's too heavy. It's interesting that the number of Jews today is slightly more than it was 2,000 years ago, because a lot of people were killed, and a lot of people joined other religions and assimilated. And so it is prophesied in scriptures that we'll be a small people always. And in the last 2,000 years, look at any other people, the Chinese, for instance, how they've gone, to more than 1 billion.
So my last two questions for you. What advice would you give folks today, young, old, or whatever? What advice would you give them as they live in the world to be better human beings? What advice would you give them for that?
So the advice that God gives to the Jews is to listen to God and to obey God. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Right? Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'kol levavecha b'kol nafshecha u'b'kol medecha. To love God. So we are commanded to love God. That's not just Jews, that's everybody. We're commanded to love God and obey God and be good. Because God is good, we're supposed to be good. And we're supposed to treat people like we want others to treat us. Right? Rabbi Hillel said this a generation before Yeshua ben Yosef, or Jesus. He said, that which is hateful to you, do not do to others. And then a generation later, Yeshua ben Yosef, or Jesus, said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's the same thing, just in reverse. But it is the idea, we're all people, life is short. We have a purpose. God has a purpose for creating the world, creating the animals, creating human beings, and creating you and me. All of us. We're important in God's economy. We have a purpose. We have limited time. We should enjoy life, because it says that God wants us to have joy in our lives, and He gives us a lot of stuff to make us happy, but we have to manage it, and we have to live right. And I would say, living with a purpose, helping others. If you're feeling depressed, that helps you. When you realize there's someone worse off than you, or even if you can't find someone that's worse off than you, you think you have the worst situation. When you help other people, it gives you purpose, and it gives you an uplifting. So I think that's very important. And we're here to teach by what we say and what we do.
Right on, right on.
So, and loving, it's all about love. It's about sharing love.
So, you are one of the most brilliant people I've ever known in my whole life.
Thank
My
you.
family loves you, the children love you.
Thank you,
people who may be on different sides of what they may think you believe, but then they meet you and be like, this guy is a real cool guy. At the very end, it's all over, and you have made the true Aliyah, I guess. What would you want people to remember about you, or to say about you?
I've always been impressed going to graveyards and reading what's written about people's lives. And we went to the Gold Country. Actually, we went up to Paradise around there someplace years ago, before it was destroyed by fire or something. And we went to the old graveyard, right? And some of the graves were pre-Civil War, and that always made me inspired. That someone's life could be summed up, as you asked me, how do I sum it up in one sentence? Now, usually it just says the name of the person, the year they were born, the year they died, maybe the dates of birth and death, maybe where they're from. But and in fact, you've been with me to Petaluma Cemetery, see the graves of my mother's side there. So I'd like to be remembered that I was a drum major for justice, quoting Martin Luther King.
Wow. Thank you, Yehiel. Anything else you want to say? I just wanted to, this was a great interview. Learned a lot. I've always learned a lot from you. But I also think it's important to document. One of the things why I love social media is it helps you to document. So 100 years from now, or whatever, when Chaz is an old man, you know what I mean? right now.
He
He's
is
like
so
6
cute.
months. Isn't he adorable?
Yeah.
He'll be being able to look at things like that and get a glimpse into
I want
who
to say
people are.
that the fact that I was able to marry as a clergy type person, even though I'm not a clergyman, but I became a clergyman for that one day on the 20th of October, 2017, and married his parents on the beach in Santa Barbara. That's one of the highlights of my life, that I would be asked to do that.
So can you imagine him being older, you know, or I don't know, and when he sees those pictures, like, who is this dude? You know, and he could look at this video and hear glimpses.
I want to say thank you, Chavez and Ashley, for that.
Yeah.
So he's our future.
That's right. So we gotta leave these.
You know, every time
traces.
if I might be walking around feeling down or whatever, feeling bored, you know, and I see a baby or a little kid, immediately I smile.
Yeah.
I can't. It's just automatic.
I can see that.
And God made it people that way. God made children that way.
I know.
That if you're a normal person at all, that's the reaction you have. That's it.
Okay, family, thank you for joining us on this Earth Mama Live special, where we talk to our dear elder brother, friend, confidant, historian, wise man, wise elder, Yehiel Yisrael. I always try to get that right. So y'all have a great holiday with your family. Remember, understand, and I'm gonna say this right. Understand the origins of how we know the holiday, so we're not celebrating that. What I hope we are celebrating is family and being better human beings and better stewards of the earth and each other. With that, peace and blessings, family.